You think seeing the truth gives you an advantage, but what if the very clarity you possess is the weapon that will isolate you, expose you, and turn others against you? In this video, we dissect the silent danger of perceiving what others refuse to recognize. Because vision, in the wrong hands, becomes a cursor, and in the right hands, it becomes domination. Imagine walking through a world asleep while you alone remain awake. You notice patterns others ignore, intentions they dismiss, threats they cannot comprehend. At first, you believe this makes you superior, but soon you discover a colder truth. People do not fear those who know little, they fear those who know too much. Throughout history, rulers, strategists, philosophers, and tyrants all confronted the same paradox. Insight is power, yet power isolates. When your eyes pierce through illusion, you become a threat to the comfortable lies others live in. And threats, as you will soon see, are rarely tolerated. Tonight, we examine the burden and the brilliance of seeing what others don't. Not with sentiment, nor with naive optimism, but with the calculated realism necessary for anyone who wishes to survive ambition, deception, and the hidden machinery of human nature. You believe that seeing the truth elevates you, but tell me, have you ever considered how dangerous clarity becomes in the presence of the mediocre? Throughout history, the individual who sees further than the crowd is rarely welcomed. He is tolerated at best, resented at worst, and eventually silenced. Why? Because when you recognize patterns others are blind to, you disrupt their comfortable illusions. You force them to confront realities they are unwilling or unable to face. And nothing enrages the average mind more than being reminded of its limitations. Consider the fate of the Roman general Belisarius, one of the greatest strategists of his era. He won impossible victories, preserved an empire collapsing under its own weight, and saw threats long before they reached the gates. Yet what did this vision earn him? Suspicion, jealousy, a ruler who feared being outshined, an emperor who, instead of rewarding foresight, punished it. Belisarius could see too much, and those with duller eyes feared what that vision might expose. You may not command armies, but the logic remains the same. When you see what others miss, patterns, motives, future consequences, you disturb the fragile peace they build on denial. A colleague resents you for predicting the failure of a project they championed. A friend distances themselves when you sense manipulation in someone they trust. A rival hates you because you perceive their strategy before they execute it. Your insight becomes an unwanted mirror, revealing truths they spend their lives refusing to acknowledge. The mediocre mind does not hate you for your intelligence. It hates you for what your intelligence forces it to confront. But let me ask you something. Do you think such people will admit this openly? Will they say, "I resent you because you understand more than I do"? Of course not. They will cloak their hostility in moral language, in social pressure, in veiled accusations. They will call you arrogant, cold, overly analytical. They will insist that you're imagining problems that aren't really there. They will frame your clarity as negativity simply because they cannot bear the weight of it. This dynamic appears everywhere: workplaces, relationships, families, political courts, digital tribes. Even in the smallest environments, insight threatens the hierarchy. People subconsciously fear that the one who sees the most will eventually take the dominant position, and so they attempt to suppress the threat early, before your perception becomes influence. Consider the philosopher who warned that truth is not merely ignored. It is actively resisted by those who benefit from shadows. When you illuminate the motives behind another's actions, you take away their power to operate unseen, and exposure is the enemy of those who rely on manipulation disguised as virtue. So you must ask yourself, do you truly want to see? Do you want to hold the burden of awareness, knowing full well that it draws hostility the way light draws predators? Because insight is not a blissful gift, it is a blade. It cuts through illusion, yes, but it also cuts bonds, relationships, and the fragile egos surrounding you. And the wielder of such a blade must learn to survive the consequences. There is a reason why cunning advisors throughout history walked carefully around kings. When their predictions proved too accurate, the court whispered that they were sorcerers, schemers, men with dangerous minds. Not because they were wrong, but because they were too right. The same principle applies to you. When you consistently anticipate outcomes others never saw coming, they will not admire you. They will feel threatened, and threatened individuals do not react logically. They react emotionally, defensively, and often aggressively. This is why those with deeper perception must learn a subtle art, the art of revealing just enough insight to guide events, while concealing the full extent of their vision. If you expose everything you see, you provoke fear. If you hide everything, you waste the advantage. Balance becomes your shield. But even with that balance, the cost remains. Seeing what others don't will always place you slightly apart, always slightly outside the circle, slightly ahead of the curve, slightly beyond comprehension. And that distance, though powerful, carries a danger far greater than jealousy or resistance. You imagine that seeing further than others is a blessing. But every gift of perception carries a hidden cost. The more you notice, the more you understand, the more you drift away from those who remain content in their blindness. Isolation is not chosen. It emerges naturally, silently, as a consequence of clarity. Ask yourself, how many times have you stayed quiet because you knew your insight would unsettle the room? How often have you predicted an outcome long before anyone else sensed danger? And how many times did those same people dismiss you, resist you, or claim you were overthinking, until the events unfolded exactly as you foresaw? This distance between your vision and their acceptance is the birthplace of isolation. Throughout history, individuals cursed with exceptional foresight all met the same fate. Take Cassandra of Troy. Blessed with the ability to see catastrophe, but condemned never to be believed. Her isolation was not supernatural. It was psychological. People reject those who shatter their comforting narratives, even when the shattering might save them. You have lived smaller versions of this. A friend confides in someone untrustworthy. You warn them. They ignore you. Later, when betrayed, they whisper, "I should have listened." But the damage has been done. You were the outsider in that moment, not because you were wrong, but because you were right too soon. This is the essence of strategic isolation. The visionary stands apart not by desire, but by necessity. To see clearly is to perceive what others conceal even from themselves. And when you bring light into a room built on shadows, the occupants resent you for disrupting the darkness they've grown comfortable in. Consider Zhuge Liang, the brilliant strategist of ancient China. His insight was legendary, his predictions unnervingly accurate. But many in his own ranks feared him, not because he lacked loyalty or virtue, but because they could not understand the depth of his reasoning. His clarity created distance. His intelligence isolated him. He lived respected, but rarely trusted. And here lies the paradox. The more reliable your insight becomes, the more alone you find yourself. People prefer companions who confirm their illusions, not ones who dismantle them. The psychological mechanism behind this is simple. Most minds are not built to handle uncomfortable truths. They react defensively, emotionally, irrationally. Show someone a danger they do not wish to see, and they attack the messenger, not the threat. Expose a manipulation they are unwilling to acknowledge, and they accuse you of paranoia rather than question the deceiver. You become the disruption. You become the problem, and so you pull back, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. Isolation becomes a strategy of survival. Yet this separation also grants power. From a distance, you see patterns more clearly. You observe without being consumed by the noise of group thinking. You watch alliances form, crumble, and reform. You detect shifts in tone, motive, and loyalty long before the crowd senses turbulence. A general on high ground sees the battlefield better than the soldiers in the dust. But that height also distances him from the warmth of their camaraderie. In your own life, this height appears in subtler ways. You notice when someone's praise carries envy beneath it. You sense when a colleague pretends to support you while quietly sabotaging your progress. You detect dissonance in a partner's words long before they admit their doubts. These tiny insights accumulate, erecting walls others never intended to build. And perhaps you've wondered, why does understanding people so deeply make it harder to stay close to them? Because to understand someone is to strip away the illusions that keep relationships simple. Clarity complicates. Vision isolates. But this isolation, when embraced rather than feared, can become the foundation of strategic strength. The one who stands apart sees more, feels less pressure to conform, and moves with greater precision. Solitude becomes not a prison, but a vantage point. Yet even this vantage comes with a hidden danger. A danger greater than resentment, greater than jealousy, greater than misunderstanding. The danger is what happens when your isolation becomes so complete that you lose the ability to influence the very people you understand. Silence is not the absence of words. It is the presence of control. And those who understand its power wield an advantage far sharper than any argument or proclamation. Let me ask you something. How often have you revealed your thoughts too quickly, only to realize later that silence would have given you far more strength? How many times have you spoken in order to be understood, when remaining unreadable would have served you better? Most people speak to feel significant. The wise remain silent to remain powerful. Throughout history, rulers and strategists understood this truth well. Consider the calculating stillness of Cardinal Richelieu, who seldom revealed his intentions until the moment of execution. Those around him were left guessing, never sure whether he favored them, mistrusted them, or saw through them entirely. His silence was not passivity, it was pressure. It forced his rivals to reveal themselves while he stood quietly, watching, absorbing, calculating. This is the true nature of strategic silence. It makes others uncomfortable enough to expose their motives. Think about your own experiences. When you fall silent in a conversation, watch how quickly others rush to fill the void. They talk to ease their discomfort. And in doing so, they reveal their fears, insecurities, desires, and weaknesses. Your quiet presence becomes a mirror in which they accidentally expose themselves. But the average person cannot remain silent. They fear being misunderstood. They fear being underestimated. They fear losing the social battlefield of impressions and appearances. You, however, must fear something else entirely, speaking before you have gathered enough information to strike with precision. Silence gives you time. Time to observe. Time to study body language. Time to calculate hidden tensions, alliances, and opportunities. Time to let others underestimate you while you quietly dissect the truth. This is why true manipulators speak less. Words are commitments. Words lock you into positions. Words give others clues about your strategy. And in a world where information is currency, silence protects your wealth. Consider the example of Talleyrand, the famed diplomat whose quiet demeanor intimidated even emperors. He mastered the art of saying little while implying much. Every gesture, every pause, every half-answer left others uncertain. That uncertainty forced them into mistakes. In silence, he gained influence. With a whisper, he redirected nations. Now let me turn this back to you. Have you ever noticed how silence unsettles manipulators? How those who rely on emotional reactions become frustrated when you do not respond? Your silence denies them control. It denies them the ability to provoke you. It denies them the satisfaction of reading your intentions. This is why strategic silence is a shield. It protects you from being exploited. It prevents others from mapping your emotional landscape. It forces them to guess, and people who guess are people who err. But silence is also a weapon. Imagine standing before someone who expects you to defend yourself, justify yourself, or explain yourself. You say nothing. They grow agitated. Their confidence wavers. Their assumptions collapse. They reveal more than they intended, scrambling to understand what your silence means. In that moment, you are no longer reacting. You are dictating the psychological terrain. However, silence must be used with intention. If you remain silent out of fear, you weaken yourself. If you remain silent out of strategy, you strengthen your position. The difference lies not in the volume of your voice, but in the purpose behind its absence. And here is a truth most people never learn. The more you speak, the more predictable you become. The less you speak, the more people project their own assumptions onto you. Those assumptions often benefit you far more than any explanation you could offer. Silence allows others to reveal their loyalties, their biases, their plans. You simply watch, detached, gathering every detail they spill in their eagerness to fill the quiet. But there is a deeper layer to strategic silence. One far more perilous and far more powerful. A layer that determines whether your silence becomes influence or isolation. Power rarely comes from what is obvious. It comes from what goes unnoticed, from what others dismiss, from the fragments of information scattered across conversations, behaviors, alliances, and mistakes, pieces that the inattentive walk past without recognizing their value. Tell me, how many times have you observed something subtle, an inconsistency in someone's words, a flicker of hesitation, a gesture of envy, and felt the quiet confirmation of a truth others failed to notice? And how often did that small insight grow into a decisive advantage later? This is the essence of weaponizing the overlooked. History is filled with figures who mastered this art. Consider the rise of Octavian, the man who would become Augustus. While Mark Antony boasted strength, armies, and the public's devotion, Octavian worked silently. He noticed fractures in Antony's alliances. He noticed resentment among senators. He noticed how Cleopatra's presence stirred old Roman prejudices. Small details, but details Antony ignored. Octavian turned those overlooked weaknesses into weapons, using them with surgical precision until his rival collapsed under the weight of what he failed to see. This is how empires are won, not through raw force, but through the mastery of hidden information. In your own life, the same principle applies. A coworker shows subtle irritation when another is praised. A friend repeatedly interrupts whenever a certain subject arises. A competitor avoids eye contact when discussing their progress. These are not coincidences. They are openings, weaknesses disguised as human behavior. Most people perceive them, but only vaguely. You, however, must convert them into strategy. Think of a modern example. Imagine you notice a colleague consistently defending a failing project. Others shrug it off as stubbornness, but you see the insecurity beneath it. You realize they fear losing status. This insight allows you to maneuver, perhaps by offering support that binds them to you, or by subtly positioning yourself to take over when their facade collapses. A small observation becomes leverage. Leverage becomes influence. This is what most never understand. People expose themselves constantly, not through grand declarations, but through minor slips in behavior, tone, or timing. Their blind spots are your opportunities. Their habits are your intel. Their contradictions are your map. But you must remain patient. Weaponizing the overlooked demands the eye of a strategist, not the impulse of a fool. Look at the Venetian diplomats, who built one of history's most resilient republics not through armies, but through intelligence gathering. They watched everything: trade patterns, alliances between minor nobles, whispers from merchants, emotional shifts in neighboring courts. What others ignored, they documented. What others dismissed, they leveraged. Venice survived because its leaders understood that power grows from the margins of perception. Let me ask you something. When someone reveals a weakness, do you store it? Do you analyze it? Do you consider how it might serve you later? Or do you let it pass, as most people do, lost in the noise of daily life? Because every pattern you observe is a potential weapon. Every subtlety is a potential advantage. A person who feels invisible envy is easily manipulated through compliments. A person who seeks validation can be guided through praise. A person who fears conflict will fold when pressed. A person who reveals impatience will make a mistake if you force delay. These insights do not scream. They whisper, and only the strategically attentive will hear them. But there is a deeper layer still. Weaponizing overlooked information is not merely about exploiting others. It is about shaping the battlefield so subtly that no one realizes you are shaping it at all. It is about placing your influence in the gaps of perception, those spaces where others are blind. When done correctly, people will move in the direction you desire without ever knowing you nudged them. Imagine guiding a group through suggestion rather than instruction. You mention a harmless detail. You highlight a minor concern. You draw attention to an overlooked possibility. Suddenly, the group shifts, debates, and decides, believing the thought was theirs, not yours. This is true power influence that leaves no fingerprints. But be warned. The moment you underestimate what others overlook is the moment you become vulnerable to someone who does not. And that leads us to the next, far sharper truth. Jealousy is the quiet poison that surrounds those who see more than others. It slips into rooms unnoticed, attaches itself to the weak, and turns their admiration into hostility. When your insight becomes undeniable, people do not celebrate it. Instead, they wonder why they didn't see what you saw. Ask yourself, how many times has someone pretended to support you, only to pull away once they realized you understood them too well? Jealousy rarely announces itself. It hides behind excuses, distance, and moral criticism. It is never framed as envy, it is framed as your supposed flaw. In courts, parliaments, and workplaces alike, jealousy thrives where ambition exceeds competence. Those who cannot match your perception will resent what they interpret as an unfair advantage. They call it arrogance, they call it luck, they call it manipulation. Anything is easier than admitting you simply see what they do not, and jealousy functions the same way today. A colleague notices that you understand a project faster than they do, and suddenly you become too competitive. A friend sees you anticipate hidden motives, and you become too suspicious. Their judgments are not about you, they are about their bruised pride. Here lies the Machiavellian truth. Jealousy is not an emotion to confront. It is a force to redirect. You cannot erase the insecurity in another person, but you can shape the story they attach to it. If they believe your insight threatens them, you turn them into adversaries. If they believe it benefits them, you turn them into allies. So how do you do this? You allow the jealous to save face. You soften your foresight with uncertainty. You attribute your accuracy to coincidence rather than superiority. You let others believe they guided you, even when they merely followed your lead. Beneath their pride, your influence grows undetected. This is not deception for cruelty's sake, it is strategy for survival. People protect their self-image with more violence than they protect their wealth. When you expose their blind spots, you wound their identity. Wounded identities retaliate. Subtlety, therefore, becomes not an option but a necessity. Yet power always adapts to the terrain, and when jealousy shapes that terrain, you must shift your strategy before others sense your advantage. But jealousy is not only external. Sometimes you become the target not because you are exceptional, but because others fear being exposed by you. A person who manipulates others hates nothing more than someone who can see through them. They read your perception as a threat to their survival. You must recognize these individuals quickly. Watch their reactions when you speak an uncomfortable truth. Observe their tension when you ask precise questions. The manipulator's jealousy is sharper than ordinary envy. It is a defensive instinct. If you do not handle it carefully, they will frame you as the villain before you know a game has begun. So what should you do when jealousy surrounds you? Withdraw just enough to appear harmless. Complement the strengths they cling to. Allow them victories that cost you nothing but inflate their confidence. In doing so, you turn conflict into compliance, resistance into reliance. Their jealousy becomes a tool rather than a threat. This approach may feel unnatural, even unfair. But understand this, you are not responsible for protecting others from their insecurities. You are responsible for protecting yourself from their reactions to those insecurities. Managing the jealousy of the dull is part of navigating human nature, not rising above it. Yet there is a deeper danger still, one far more corrosive than jealousy itself, a danger that arises when envy evolves into quiet sabotage, calculated resistance, or collective resentment. And before you can defend yourself, you must understand how these forces gather in the shadows. People claim to value honesty, yet they panic when confronted with a mind that sees too clearly. The more insight you possess, the more carefully you must conceal it. Not because truth is dangerous in itself, but because people are. Ask yourself, how often have you revealed too much? Your understanding, your instincts, your predictions, only to see others recoil, doubt, or quietly resent you? How often has your clarity been met not with appreciation, but with suspicion? The more someone realizes you can read them, the more they fear you, and fear quickly turns to hostility. Throughout history, the sharpest minds learn to survive not through proclamation, but through disguise. Consider the strategist who served multiple courts during the Italian wars, always appearing mild, agreeable, harmless. Behind that mask, he understood every ambition, every betrayal, every scheme. And because others underestimated him, he remained indispensable while his rivals destroyed one another. His brilliance was never the threat. The revelation of his brilliance would have been. This is the paradox of perception. To use it fully, you must hide it completely. Think about your own life. The moment someone realizes you can interpret their motives, their tone shifts. They become guarded. They monitor their words. They see you not as an ally, as an observer who cannot be deceived. And human beings despise those they cannot deceive. So you must create an illusion. Not of stupidity, but of harmlessness. Let others believe you are attentive, but not penetrating. Curious, but not analytical. Aware, but not threatening. This illusion gives them comfort. And comfort makes them careless. Imagine a conversation in which someone attempts to manipulate you. If they believe you are perceptive, they conceal their hand. If they believe you are unaware, they overplay it. They exaggerate. They slip. They reveal their true motive piece by piece. By hiding your insight, you extract theirs. This is the same principle used by interrogators, diplomats, and master negotiators. They do not confront people with the truth they already know. They pretend to know nothing. And in that void, others reveal everything. Take the example of Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty. He listened to his ministers with an expression of polite curiosity, rarely revealing whether he accepted or rejected their arguments. They believed they were shaping his thoughts. In reality, he was studying theirs. His power came not from speaking, but from withholding, from masking his judgment long enough to learn theirs. This is the posture you must adopt. Because the moment others recognize your depth, they react in one of two ways. They either fear you, or they attempt to compete with you. Both reactions drain your energy and limit your influence. But when you hide your insight, something remarkable happens. People expose their contradictions, their alliances, their insecurities, their ambitions, all while believing you see nothing at all. And yet, hiding your perception is not only a tactic against manipulation, it is also a shield against envy. When others believe your successes come from mysterious luck or gentle intuition, they tolerate them. When they suspect your success comes from sharp intelligence, they resent it. Do you want unnecessary enemies? Do you want jealous observers waiting for your misstep? Do you want people whispering that you are calculating or cold simply because you understand them better than they understand themselves? Of course not. Therefore, silence becomes your ally. Ambiguity becomes your armor. Understatement becomes your strategy. Let others underestimate you. Let them imagine they are guiding you. Let them build illusions about your limitations. Those illusions form the walls behind which your true perception operates safely. Yet there is a deeper, darker layer beneath all this. When you hide your insight long enough, something predictable occurs. People begin to trust you. Not because you are trustworthy, but because they believe you cannot see enough to harm them. They confide in you. They reveal their doubts. They confess their plans. And like a patient strategist, you collect every piece quietly, discreetly, without ever showing the full sharpness of your mind. But concealment carries its own cost. If you hide too much, you risk becoming invisible. If you reveal too much, you risk becoming a threat. The balance between the two is delicate. And that brings us to the next question, one more dangerous, more consequential, and more revealing than all the rest. Powerful minds often imagine that clarity is a gift bestowed upon them automatically, yet you know better. You have felt confusion linger like fog around your ambitions. Keynote 7 exposes this truth: perception is a battlefield. The one who controls interpretation controls direction, momentum, and ultimately the allegiance of others. Consider how rulers reshaped events through careful framing. A defeat became a strategic withdrawal. A mistake became a calculated test of loyalty. They understood what experts in psychology affirm today: people rarely respond to facts. They respond to the meaning someone attaches to them in moments when fear clouds judgment. When you shape perception, you do more than influence thought, you engineer emotional gravity. People lean toward the interpretation that rewards their desires and excuses their weaknesses. This is why propaganda, branding, and personal reputation all rely on the same principle: guide the eye, and the mind follows without manipulation. Yet the most dangerous illusion is believing others see the world as you do. They do not, they never have. Every person carries fears, secret ambitions, and unspoken resentments that distort their vision. If you fail to account for these distortions, you will misread intentions and expose yourself to threats. This is why skilled leaders observe quietly before acting. They listen not for words but for patterns. How someone reacts to criticism, how they speak when confident, how they shift when their interests are threatened. Through this awareness, you predict behavior before it manifests, giving you what others mistake for intuition. But perception is not merely reading others, it is shaping what they read in you. People must never know the full architecture of your mind. Show enough strength to earn respect, enough warmth to appear human, yet never enough certainty for them to predict your next move. Mystery keeps power. Think of generals who marched with unreadable faces. Their soldiers projected courage onto them, even when the night before battle filled them with dread. The farce aid created stability. People follow the image they need, not the truth beneath it. If you craft an image, you influence actions before words spoken. But illusions become dangerous when you start believing them yourself. Many leaders collapse not from external threats, but from their refusal to confront uncomfortable truths. Reality does not bend simply because your followers do. When you mistake praise for competence or obedience for loyalty, your downfall becomes inevitable soon enough. To see clearly, you must detach from your own desires. Desire blurs perception more than any lie spoken by others. It convinces you that people mean well, that situations will resolve themselves, that warnings are overreactions. This bias has ended careers, destroyed alliances, and blinded many before they realized danger. So you must cultivate disciplined skepticism. Not cynicism, but strategic doubt. Question motives gently, observe inconsistencies quietly, and test loyalties subtly. The analysts in history shared this trait. They verified every assumption. When you refuse to accept appearances at face value, you become immune to traps that ensnare the unwary. Yet awareness alone is insufficient. You must also decide which perceptions to reinforce and which to dismantle. Some illusions help you, others weaken you. If people believe you are predictable, you must shatter that belief. If they assume you are desperate for approval, deny it through controlled indifference and restraint. This mastery gives birth to a peculiar power, the ability to bend expectations. When others cannot anticipate your timing, tone, or strategy, they hesitate. Hesitation creates openings. A pause from your opponent is worth more than a compliment from an ally. Control their expectations, and you control their behavior entirely. But remember, this perception is never static. It must be tended like a garden and sharpened like a blade. If you let it decay, others will define you before you define yourself. And once they succeed, every move you make becomes a reaction, not a command. That is decline itself. So ask yourself, what do people think you are, and what have you allowed them to think? The next keynote will force you to confront the image you project and the one you must build. If you are prepared, step forward. If not, forces unseen will shape you in silence. Control, when done correctly, is invisible. The hand that guides is never the hand that appears. People follow the path they believe they chose. And that is the greatest victory of all. You've seen how influence hides behind suggestion, how power moves in silence, how the most decisive actions are taken long before anyone realizes they were being steered. So ask yourself, do you want to command openly and be feared for it? Or do you want to shape outcomes so subtly that others defend the very decisions you planted in their minds? True mastery is not domination, it is direction, without detection. And if you understand that, you understand the essence of quiet authority. Now, if you're ready to think like those who rule behind the curtain, I want to hear your thoughts. Comment below and tell me what insight struck you the most. Subscribe if you want more strategies carved from power, psychology, and cold realism, and share this video with someone who still believes control requires force.